Today we're on to welcome Theresa Lyons to the show today. I'm very excited to have her on. She talks about some amazing topics in terms of self-regulation, right? We have certain things that we need to address in our lives. Like if we're dealing with a kid with autism or dealing with certain challenges just in general, we have a lot of regulation tools, but how do we personalize that, right? That's the key. Is how do we actually utilize these tools on our own journey? She helps many parents and also kind of understanding the disease of autism as a whole, right? And she's also a PhD from Yale, so she really knows about this topic and how we can actually address this in our own lives today. So I'm very excited to have her on. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
Great to hear. So I'm very curious to hear your story and how you got into these tools in a sense and how to self-regulate and also autism and everything that goes into that.
Sure. So I got into the whole field of autism because of my daughter. So my daughter was diagnosed with autism when she was 3.5. I had no experience whatsoever before that in the autism world. However, I, like you mentioned, have my PhD in computational chemistry. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I was at first actively creating drugs, or hope to be, soon to be drugs, that would go through clinical trials for different therapeutic areas. And then I also worked on the business side of the pharmaceutical industry, so understanding key opinion leaders and how do you get the field of medicine to move? How does it change? And so when my daughter was diagnosed with autism, as a medical strategist, I was expecting, okay, give me the options. What is the gold standard approach and what are the cutting edge and, what tests are we? So I'm already thinking on the microscopic level, and I wasn't given any of that. And to this day, no parent really is, because autism is a diagnosis that's made on observation. So there is no lab test, there's no MRI, there's nothing that can really quantify, okay, what about health is impacting and creating these observations.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So it sounds like if you get this diagnosis, you're kind of left in the dark in a sense, not really knowing what direction to go in.
Many times, yes. And my daughter got that diagnosis 13 years ago, and parents I talk to this day are still being given the same information I was given 13 years ago, which is basically autism typically does not get better, it gets worse. There's not really any medication you can do except for irritability, and that's for when things get really bad. And there's educational approaches, so ABA and ways to break things down into small, manageable pieces. But, it takes 40 hours a week to really teach someone with autism, and those wait lists are very long. And parents are still being told this to this day, and that's all bad information.
Yeah. Very interesting. I didn't realize there wasn't like a diagnosis criteria. That's very interesting to hear because I thought just based on observation, like, do we really know for sure? This kind of goes through my mind.
Yeah, so what they have a criteria of, communication being impacted. So communication can look very differently on the autism spectrum. So level 1, someone could have speech, but maybe they're very restricted in the types of conversations they have. So maybe they have speech, but it's only about trains or airplanes or waterfalls or something like that, right? So it's not that back and forth conversation. Whereas let's say someone on level 3 autism might have no speech whatsoever. So you really want to be in front of someone who has seen autism a lot. But these are the kinds of things that they're looking for, and it is up to interpretation in some instances.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So could you actually describe autism? Like if we're like had to define it to see that what it is in people, and if perhaps people don't really understand it as a whole, like what would you say to that?
So autism has it's complex because of these levels and how it might look. So I could describe level 1 is what used to be called Asperger's. So that might be someone who can dress themselves and brush their teeth, maybe make their own breakfast. When they're like 15, 16, they might be walking off to high school themselves, right? But they might be very restricted in the socialization aspect. So they might have speech, but they might not have the ability to really make friends and form that bond and have that back and forth conversation. There might also be some restriction in fidgeting on something, or a fixation with, spinning wheels or something along those lines. So there's usually some kind of repetitiveness, and this can vary. There's some kind of repetitiveness that really impacts the quality of life. And that's what doctors are looking for. Okay, does someone have speech? Can they actually form relationships, or is that speech really impacted in the ability to create friendships? Whereas level 3 looks very different in that, let's say a 15-year-old at level 3 might not be able to dress themselves, might not be able to speak at all. Maybe they have some kind of communication, whether it's PECs, meaning pictures that they point to. Maybe it is typing on a keyboard. So some people with autism in level 3, they can learn how to control their motor and be able to communicate and show that they have understanding. They just don't have the communication piece. But that same person might have self-injurious behavior, so they might bang their head against the wall. They might be injurious to other people. Having autism meltdowns is universal across the spectrum. So when the body just gets overwhelmed with too much stimulation, you can have either a meltdown or a shutdown. Those are pretty universal, but how autism specifically looks depends really on the level of autism.
Got it. Makes sense. So it sounds like there's levels to it, kind of like a spectrum in a sense.
Correct. And this is where things like poor eye contact might come into play more with someone who's on level 1, who has some speech, but doesn't have the skill of creating that relationship using their speech. So this is where limited body language can also play into effect more on level 1 than on level 3. So this is why when you get a diagnosis for autism, you really want to be in front of a doctor who is well versed in the criteria and can really look for these real key important informations. Because again, it's all based on observation, and we know doctor's appointments are not very long. So it really presents a lot of challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of parents with kids with autism, like I know you talk about a lot of self-regulation strategies. Can you describe what that is and how we can actually start to begin this process in a sense?
Sure. So parents of kids with autism are under a tremendous amount of stress. There's new research that is really trying to understand this level of stress that parents are under. And research shows that a PTSD diagnosis from raising a child with autism is increased about 20 to 30% than parents who are raising kids without autism. So there's a lot of situations that parents with kids with autism go through. So autism meltdowns are very traumatic, right? They're traumatic for the child, but they're also traumatic for the parent, because the parent is trying to figure things out. So most parents of kids with autism love their kids and want to see them succeed, and they see their child want to do certain things in life, but then something just holds them back, whether it's some kind of stimming or it's lack of communication, or then different behavior starts to happen. So parents are always searching for help and support, and that's also where the PTSD diagnosis can come in, right? So you have this traumatic experience with your child, let's say some kind of meltdown, but then when you go to seek support and help and to explain this is what's going on, sometimes doctors say, well, it's your fault. You should have recognized a trigger or something like that. That's extremely traumatic, right? A doctor might say, listen, I really don't know what to do because we don't really understand autism. That's a legitimate answer, but it's also very traumatic because it doesn't help the situation. So there are so many things that parents are going through that is related to helping support their child. So it's not directly from the child. I certainly don't want anyone with autism to to think that what they did was so extreme it caused PTSD in their parents. It's really coming also from the parent trying to seek answers and not finding any. So there's research that goes into this regulation piece, right? So when the parent becomes so, in many ways, dysregulated, where they might have a PTSD diagnosis, that's really when it becomes important to build a lot more support around that parent. Obviously, it's important to do that beforehand, but a lot of times that doesn't happen. So things like EMDR therapy is really powerful, and the research is starting to show that it's impactful for parents who have kids with autism, and the parent also has been diagnosed PTSD. So there's a small research study that showed there were 7 parents, it was 5 moms and 2 dads, and it showed that they did, it was less than 10 EMDR sessions, and they no longer met the diagnosis for PTSD. So support really helps impact the parents, and that research study also showed that some of the kids were better regulated because their parents were better regulated. So the kids were benefiting from the parents having more regulation.
Wow. Yeah. Co-regulation is key, right? Because if you actually
Yeah.
self-regulate yourself, it's like you definitely influence people around you. I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah, but it's hard as an autism parent. There's so much pressure and so much going on. You have to figure out it's just overwhelming and wild. And so it regulation with the parent really starts small. So like usually you get the diagnosis and it feels like everything has just exploded around you, right? You've got to figure out schooling, you've got to figure out different therapies, you now have different doctors, and sometimes the kid with autism is not sleeping, right? That means you're not sleeping. So regulation for a parent and a child just becomes so difficult, but it's one of the most important things to do so that also the parent can then be in a really good place to make these important decisions.
Right. Yeah. I just feel like it's a general principle of success, right? Just being able to influence people around you with your own state. I think that's just a powerful thing in general, too.
It is very powerful, but I can say it is very difficult in the beginning when you're trying to
Yeah,
figure
for
out
sure.
everything and everything is just coming at you fast. It dysregulation can happen. And I'll say for myself, I never really thought too much about regulation and dysregulation and my emotions and really understand. Autism taught me all of this. And I'm definitely very grateful to know myself better now so that I can impact my daughter in a much more positive way.
Yeah. Like these challenges we can utilize in a sense to kind of learn, right? Because we have a problem, so we seek a solution, right? And it kind of opens up this door of possibilities that we didn't really know existed in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely.
Yeah, because you mentioned again, like we're kind of left in dark, where like we really want our kids to win in a sense. We want them to be their best and all that, but we just don't know what to do in the beginning. That can be really hard. You mentioned that, but it's a process, just like anything, right?
It is. It's it makes so much more sense when you're on the other side of it, right? I mean, this has been 13 years ago where when my daughter was diagnosed. So it does take time, and it's certainly important for parents to have grace with themselves and to really understand, all right, let's make progress, and things aren't going to drastically change overnight with one little thing that we do. So autism does teach a lot about persistence, for sure.
100%. Yeah, grace is key because challenges are going to come up, frustrating situations. But can we do the best we can to have compassion within that? Because I feel that's going to help us along that, and especially in the moment where we need it the most.
Yeah, definitely. But it is hard.
Yeah. So, in terms of these tools, what can we start to utilize in a sense? Maybe we're just getting started. Like, what comes to mind that can actually be most applicable to people today, so we can actually utilize their own lives to make it our own?
Sure. So just short walks, really can do something amazing. So a short walk in nature. And if you're in a city, you can still do that short walk, find a park, or just look at the trees that are on the sidewalk. It's just important to take that step back and start to carve out some time specifically to benefit yourself. So this is not to, okay, let me go down nature and I'll mow the lawn, or, I'll rake the leaves or something like that, right? So the activity really should be nourishing you. And parents in the beginning can really only start with about 5 minutes, because then it feels like, oh, I should be learning something about autism. I should be doing something for my child, right? The pressure is so intense that it's really important for parents to start with these small things. Sometimes it's just making a cup of tea and sitting down and drinking that cup of tea while it's hot, right? So that's 5 minutes. But the whole idea is to help your nervous system get out of that fight or flight. And when you're in that calm state, that is when you make better decisions for your child.
I love that. Yeah. So it sounds like having grace in the process, but also understanding it's about getting those small wins, right? Getting that self-care in can really help you have your cup filled in a sense to actually be of service and actually be there when people need it.
Yeah, it's really hard to have patience with your child when their patience tank is empty, right? Like, there are days when parents are like, I just don't have any more patience. And then they might get irritable. They might snap at their child. And that's not how any parent wants to be with their child. So sometimes you make those mistakes and you see the disappointment on your child's face. And then you learn, okay, you know what? Before they came home, I need to carve out 5 minutes so that I am a lot more pleasant, right? So a lot of times we only learn after seeing the disappointment on our children's face. And so it's important to recognize, okay, what is it that I need so that I can be the parent I want to be? And to start small. And with that, right? So maybe it's also hydration. Okay, I know I'm irritable when I don't drink enough water, or I know I'm irritable when I'm hungry. So a lot of these basic needs, parents of kids with autism, they just try and push through everything, and they neglect a lot of their basic needs, which then allows them to be such a different parent.
Yeah. Sounds like a bit of a mindset shift as well, right? Because a lot of us, we don't really understand the importance of self-care either.
Correct. Definitely. And this is a long journey. So you definitely want to care for yourself so that you have health through this entire process.
For sure. So we have walking, hydration. Is there another thing that comes to mind? Or is there basically like having a wide variety of tools for that personalization, right? Is the key.
Yeah, it depends on the person. So I myself, I've always done meditation. I really get a lot from it. I think having just that peace and that quietness then really allows for that space to think about, okay, what makes sense next for us to do? Like, what is most important to us? But it depends on the parent. So, laughing with friends is certainly important. Sometimes friends just send each other, different videos and memes and stuff like that. That might be the starting point for those parents. As the journey went along for me, like a few years ago, I started doing open water swimming, right? I had more time, obviously, but this is how it grows. And so open water swimming is great exercise. I actually have a fear of the water. I have the fear of seaweed. I have a fear of fish. So I get to combat all these fears while getting exercise and, coming out of the water, I feel really refreshed, right? So it builds. So you start with these small things, which seem kind of silly, like a 5-minute walk, okay, or I'm going to drink a cup of tea. That seems so basic, right? But many times that's where you have to start. And then as you start to figure things out for your child and they begin to grow and need you less, then that gives you more time to cultivate more skills in yourself for self-care and how do I show up to be the parent that I want to be, because parenting, our role gets faded out, and so we really want to instill those characteristics into our kids and then watch them use it.
Yeah, we don't really think about that. What we do is going to actually instill those things in other people as well. Just being the model in life for what is possible is so important.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So it sounds like giving yourself a space in a sense to kind of self-reflect, kind of work on things, and being able to see what's working, what isn't. Just basically do some self-assessment, actually kind of organize things and be more connected, right?
Definitely. It is with autism, a lot gets thrown at the parents. It really does. So if you don't take some time for yourself to really get centered and grounded, then you'll just constantly be pushed over with new information and new requests, and you won't have a footing, and it will always feel like people are making decisions for you or you're just reacting, and that's not the way you want to go through your child's
100%.
childhood.
Of curiosity, do we know the causes of autism? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is there anything that is research in that or anything we think about?
So, a cause for autism, one universal cause to explain all of autism, has not been found yet. And I think it will be quite difficult, right? Because you have different presentations, you have different behaviors, different symptoms, different challenges. There are some pretty universally accepted risk factors. And so those are things that parents can certainly look at, like soil pollution is a risk factor, heavy metals, different environmental toxins, mold. There's a lot of even different vitamin deficiencies can lead to increased risk in autism. So these are all things for parents to understand. And this is where, after parents get the autism diagnosis and they start really asking, okay, but let's say, why is my child having difficulty making friends? Because it looks like he wants to, but it's something's holding him back. So what is that? Why is he laughing uncontrollably? What is causing that, right? So this is when parents start to get granular and get specific about symptoms, and then really ask for medical answers, because that's important.
100%. So it sounds like there's a lot of risk factors that are potentially lifestyle related.
Potentially environmental related for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, environmental. It's like because we can choose how we interact with the environment in a sense.
Yes, we definitely can.
Yeah.
But some of it, I mean, I didn't know all these different risk factors, right? So I only learned this stuff after the fact. So it's definitely eye-opening, I found after the fact.
Yeah, 100%. That's why like this information is so important. So we can actually be aware of these things to look out for. Just be like kind of proactive. This goes for really anything. Like what is your, I guess, genetic predisposition to a disease, right? But then you have to control what you can, like with epigenetics and those factors.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there are different factors about genetics for autism, but there's not a particular like genetic related gene that can explain all of autism. And a lot of times people are looking for that. So many times people say, oh, there's no genetic reason for autism, but there's so much variation, and there's so many genes that are important, especially ones that are related to detoxification. And then you get into that whole epigenetics area where, okay, genetics are important, but our environment is important, and our environment turns on genes or turns them off. And obviously that can change quite a bit for a person.
Yeah. Of curiosity, is this something that can be reversed in a sense? Like, what do we know about that? Is there anything that we can look into in terms of potential healing?
It is true, yes. So different words have been used to describe that. So reversing, when my daughter was diagnosed, and I dove deep into the scientific literature, the published research then showed that about 10% of kids with autism achieved an optimal outcome. And so they were defining optimal outcome back then as losing the autism diagnosis. So if you were put in front of that same doctor and they were looking for these different observations, so difficulty with speech and let's say eye contact, body language, different repetitiveness, none of that was there anymore. So back about 10 years ago or so, that number was about 10%. And studies like this over the decades have been done, usually once a decade, because it takes time, right? So you're watching a child who is diagnosed and you're watching them over several years to see what happens, right? So this is not research that can be done yearly or anything like that. So once a decade, these research articles come out, and the last one showed that 37% of kids with autism lost their diagnosis. And so they've now termed there to be non-persistent autism and autism. So there is so much change in what happens with someone with an autism diagnosis that they're actually changing how they describe autism.
Got it. So it seems like it's possibilities kind of be like open-minded in a sense.
It's possible. You have to be educated on the possibilities. You have to be determined, right? So it's not something that is necessarily straightforward, even though in many ways it's simple, right? And there's that dichotomy of whether something is simple and complex, and there's a lot that can go into achieving optimal health for your child, right? With all these different variations. There's different. We haven't even gotten into gut health and the microbiome. So there's so many different areas of health that might be an issue for that one particular child. So it really becomes this journey and this process of ensuring optimal health. And that really involves a lot of functional medicine, doing different lab testing. I advocate lab testing as much as possible because I don't think this is something really to like guess and be like, oh, well, maybe they have a candida infection. Well, let's just treat it like they do. No, do a test, right? Maybe they have mold exposure, so let's just do detoxing. It doesn't matter what kind of detox. Let's just detox. No, like that is not the scientific and logical approach, right? That is how you end up exhausted and confused and just really worn out as a parent. So this process is, you want to be as meticulous as possible, and you want to use real science as much as possible.
That makes sense. I mean, because everything is connected within the bodies. Like once we start to heal the systems, it's going to influence everything, right? It's just a general principle of wellness, right? Everything is interconnected. And we start to work on these things, the mold, the heavy metals, everything is going to definitely see some improvement at the least.
Right. Yep. There's so much about health and people with autism that can be improved, and that's really that important aspect to think about. And many times people with autism, when they go to a doctor and they say, "Hey, I'm having difficulty with X," the doctor a lot of times says, "Oh, you have autism? Yeah, that's just autism, right? Anxiety." OCD. Well, that's just autism. That's just what it is, right? And it's typically going to get worse. Even things like potty training. Some doctors are like, oh, well, kids just don't feel themselves when they're wet. They have autism. That's just the way it is. And that's not true, right? So many times parents are given substandard care, and it's really important to listen to our intuitions when we think about that and we're like, that doesn't sound right. So if you have that feeling as an autism parent, trust that feeling and find someone that really understands your concern.
Yes, you have to listen to parents' intuition, inner guidance. It's the key, like because these people are well-meaning, but not everyone has the answers like that, especially if they're not trained and they don't know what to look for, right? Right,
exactly. Yeah, most doctors are well-meaning. They really are.
Yeah.
But training is something very different.
No doubt. I mean, the medical system has its place for emergencies and things like that, but unfortunately, like we are just terrible at chronic disease. And that's where we have to look to holistic strategies and wellness and lifestyle and everything that is required of our own biology. All right.
Right. And then it becomes more about the parents, right? And the parents seeking out the answers. The obligation is on the parent, which again is not something autism parents need more, right? We don't need more responsibility, but unfortunately that is the way it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just having like personal agency and autonomy like within yourself would help because again, like these external circumstances, they're saying one thing, but the truth may be something else. And then oftentimes you look within.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Intuition is important in this aspect, as well as using
Yeah.
lab testing. So you want to use science as much as possible. And a lot of times the science validates a parent's intuition.
Definitely. I would imagine it probably depends on the spectrum as well, like whether you see full improvement or just some improvement. Is there a role that plays too?
So the research isn't detailed enough for me to really comment specifically on that.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah. You had mentioned, testing and things like that. Is there things that come to mind in terms of that for these things I want to look out for, like just to have some general knowledge and direction of where to go?
Sure. So some of the most basic things are basic health. So things like vitamin D. Many times kids, if they're not getting any vitamin D supplementation, they're going to be deficient. And there's different levels for optimal health, right? So vitamin D, typically if someone is not taking in any supplement, they're going to be deficient in it. And then let's say deficiency is anything under 30, right? And conventional medicine will say, if you've got 30, you're good, right? But then, I don't know, we as parents, we don't want our kids to be good, right? Like, so what is optimal health? And so that's where, functional medicine gives the guidance of it's really important for vitamin D levels to be around 60, which is double of what conventional medicine might say. So this is where you start getting into a lot of different details as to, okay, what level of health do we want for our child? And something like vitamin D is the cornerstone for our immune system. And so if someone is having difficulties, let's say with mold or different toxins, you want your immune system to be functioning as great as possible. And so your child's going to need different components of that. And so vitamin D is, one of those. And that can be measured easily through your regular pediatrician. Obviously, it's a blood test, no one's favorite for kids. But there's certain aspects of basic health that a lot of times are just being ignored.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, vitamin D is so important for so many different things, right? Just being able to have basic things like testing for heavy metals and mold and all that. Like, is there anything that comes to mind for that in particular?
Definitely, those are all important to do. It really depends on the symptoms of the child. There's different infections that are important to look out for. And really, a lot of times, it's best if parents are meticulous and really examine all of these areas so that nothing is missed.
Yeah. Is there anything to look out for infections in particular?
Candida infections are very common. Not every child with autism has them, but many do. And again, testing. It's real simple. So if any parent has a question of, does my child have gut infections? Just do a test, right? There's no need to wonder. There's no need to guess and say, well, let's just try this. That's a strategy that you really don't want to have. The whole, well, let's just try and see what happens. There's no need to do that.
Yeah. Sounds like leaving no stone unturned in a sense, like kind of like just making sure how everything is doing, just having like a full, health analysis, right?
Most definitely. That's the way to make sure things aren't missed.
Yeah. Very important. And in terms of healing strategies, like what do you see in general that would be beneficial for people with autism? Like if we're just getting started in that, from a lifestyle standpoint, or like just kind of a healing in general, like what are your thoughts?
Sure. So over the years, I've developed something called the Navigating Autism Matrix. And so that has 7 categories that parents want to focus on. And so there's a lot of different things to do in the categories. But so the categories are diet. So diet is obviously important. Things like gluten-free sometimes make a huge difference for kids with autism, but not everyone. Dairy free, same thing. Sometimes that makes a huge impact. Again, it depends on the biology and chemistry of the child. So diet is important. Then healthcare team. So it's a team. There's not going to be just one doctor that can answer all of the questions related to autism. You want to have conventional medicine doctors, you want to have functional medicine doctors. You really want to build a team, and it depends on what the child needs, because you match the doctor to what your child needs, not the other way around. So you don't want to go out and be like, oh, this doctor I heard is a great doctor, and they might specialize in, let's just say, mold. And maybe your child doesn't have mold issues, right? So that would be a mismatch. So you really want to build the team based upon what the child needs. Then we have mindset. So we covered that a little bit already. So mindset is important. And this is mindset of the parent, not of the child. It's the mindset of the parent, because this is a challenging situation to be in. So mindset really matters. We have supplements and prescriptions. So obviously you want to do testing to find out deficiency, find out what does this child really need, what kind of infections are there. So you want to use supplements or prescriptions, whatever makes the most sense depending upon those lab tests. We also have education. So there are many different ways to educate a person with autism, and you really want to find the fit for that child. So is it more that they need to develop that relationship? Do they really need to develop the actual physical production of speech or some type of communication? Do you want to have your child taught in an intrinsic way versus an extrinsic? So ABA is typically extrinsic, where kids are learning things and they might be rewarded with an M&M or a cookie or an iPad break, right? That's extrinsic. So there are different modalities to teach children extrinsically or intrinsic motivation, right? That's a very different approach. Then we also have probiotics, because gut health is super important. And then the last category is celebrating success. So there's a lot of challenges that go through raising a child with autism, but it's really important to celebrate these milestones and to celebrate accomplishments. And yes, it might be taking longer than, another child, but it's your child, and this is their childhood, and this is how you can teach resiliency. You can teach your child to grow up to be able to handle difficult situations. So celebrating success is really important to do, even if it seems like such a small success. It's not.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, celebrating success is so important. You have to celebrate your wins because that helps build momentum and keeps the motivation, inspiration going too.
Yep, exactly. Most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to understand, like, it's not about comparison either. Like, it's such a personalized journey. And health in general is you have to kind of like focus on the actions in a sense, right? Just don't necessarily focus on what you can't control, but just focus on the actions that you take. And that's probably the best approach because that's how we start to build that forward progress momentum and not get caught in this comparison.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because, health is like such a personalized process in of itself. And we kind of mentioned it's like so many different things that go into that. Whether you're dealing with a certain condition within that, okay, that may be for you, but that may not be for the other person, right? So just like even listening to advice in general, like people who are talking about it and meaning just because something is right doesn't mean it's right for you either. So it's having that discernment, right? Just being able to navigate that in a skillful way is so key.
But it's so hard to when you hear something that worked for someone else, you just the emotions are like, okay, I want that same thing. And that's where mindset really comes in, because you need to be able to say, okay, does that really make sense for my child? Are they having those symptoms? Like, yes, it's great that that parent figured out what it is that their child need, but does it really apply to us, or am I just getting caught up in emotions? So mindset is super important.
Yeah. How do we navigate these things from a mental standpoint? Because you mentioned it's like, yeah, it's hard, right? But how do we start to build that resilience, right, within ourselves so we can actually, kind of make it more graceful in a sense, like being able to, I guess, succeed in the process as well.
Well, having a growth mindset is something that will come in handy for sure, right? Because you're going to have a lot of setback, you're going to have a lot of challenges. And if you just fold, and if you just think, okay, we're never going to figure this out, I haven't figured this out yet, so it's never going to happen, that mindset is going to limit your child's future. So the growth mindset is all about, all right, I don't have the skill yet. What skill do I need to have? Okay, maybe that's why you add to your healthcare team, right? So maybe you don't understand different aspects of health. All right, let me find that first step to do. Let me find, let me make sure that the basic health of my child is covered. And the mindset is that important piece that will keep you going, even when you get it wrong, even when you fail, that you just know, okay, I'm not going to give up. I just haven't figured it out yet. So that little word yet has become one of my favorite, because that's really the key to the growth mindset. Because if you think, I just had a terrible day, nothing's ever going to change, and nothing's changed yet, right? So you can't count yourself out.
Right. Yeah, keeping that hope. It's like, what can we look for on the other side? Because other side meaning like choosing that growth instead of fear, because it's going to lead to a whole nother outcome. And also, I feel like success is something you attract by the person that you become, right? So it's about that process and being process oriented too.
Yeah, definitely. Having a process, being detail oriented, and just having faith in yourself that you will figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. You have to stay that course in a sense. Keep that sense of resilience, right? Because don't change the goal, change the approach, right? Because failure is going to happen, but failure is feedback too, right? So how can we start to deal with that and start to learn from these things in a sense and not be a victim of the process?
Correct. Yeah, and to just have that confidence in yourself that, okay, I have done hard things in the past. Sometimes you just have to reflect. Okay, I did this. Oh, I remember when I didn't think I'd ever be able to do that. I do that every day now, even without thinking about it, right? And that's that growth mindset. So that's that reflection. And a lot of times, those moments of clarity come when we're just out walking in nature, or we're just sipping a cup of tea, and all of a sudden, right, we have that space to say, oh yeah, that's right, I remember when I did that and that was hard. Okay. And that's where it all starts a lot of times, in those little 5-minute breaks.
Yeah, about being a victor, right? That self-reflection is so key, right? Also, oftentimes we have to give ourselves the space, because sometimes we have to create the space. It's hard when distractions are going around, things like that. We have to kind of give ourselves the internal spaciousness to kind of navigate it and kind of think, right?
Yeah,
So we can
you have
actually
to have that discipline.
make right decisions, you know?
Yeah, it takes discipline to carve out time in your schedule, to just like, well, let me give myself some time to think, or let me give myself some time to breathe. Let me give myself some time to just unwind.
Yeah, so key. Like being able to like self-assess. I mean, it's just general principles like success in general, right? But then you kind of apply it to where it really matters, like in these situations. It's so key, right? So we can show up as our best self. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But that's where the added pressure comes too, right? So it's like, this is our child. Oh, like, I want to get this right. I don't want to make a mistake. I just want this to be done. I want my child to be healthy. Like, so the intensity just amps up even more.
Yeah. Just being willing to stay the course. Like, don't necessarily focus on the time. Just focus on what you can on the day-to-day, the task in hand, and that's going to lead to the most optimal outcome, because then your energy is actually concentrated where it needs to be, instead of like trying to control what you can't.
Right. Yep. Definitely.
Yeah. Because power of self-assessment. It's like these are just general things in like relationships, right? Because people don't necessarily want the average version of you, want the best version of you. And in order to do that, you actually have to show up, like being willing to show up for yourself, so you can show up for the world.
Yeah. And show up for your kid. That's the whole, that's really what it is all about. Because again, many times parents see their kid, they see this like flicker of what they want to do, or different things in life. They see the enjoyment and joy in their child's life, and then it slips away. And so it really is about, all right, how can I make sure that my child has what they need so that they can do what they want in life?
Wow. It's powerful. Like being able to keep that spark alive and that possibility, like see the change and actually kind of inspire people to do that, or like help people reach their goals in a sense, and kind of just be there in a sense, and being able to provide what is necessary to kind of foster growth, right?
Yes. Yep. Foster growth and overcome challenges.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Like, gotta keep that spark alive and just believe in the true north. That's what it's all about. And just being able to, cultivate that light and, believe in the truth and possibility.
Definitely.
Yeah. 100%. All right. Theresa, has been awesome. I appreciate you today so much for coming on the show today, sharing your story with us, all your insights, and how we can actually do some self-regulation with this process, right? Now, we can apply this to anything in life, but especially if we're dealing with a hard situation, we have to be a leader in a sense, like being able to kind of cultivate these character traits within us, develop these practices, and make it our own, right? And then being on the other side of it, meaning like we choose growth, right? It's not like challenges aren't going to happen, but we're no longer choosing to be a victim. We have this knowledge, and then we can choose to become wise through it. Like, because knowledge is not power, knowledge applied is power and wisdom. And we choose the growth process. And then being on the other side of that, now we kind of like going back to being success is something we track by the person that you become, right? So living by that and understanding that we can be empowered within this and potentially do some healing work as well on the disease level and like the inner work. So it's been a very valuable conversation, and I thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. So if people would like to get connected with you and all your work, where can we go?
You can certainly go to navigatingautism.com. And I do spell autism differently. I spell it AWE. So that's navigatingawetism.com. And you can also find me on YouTube. I've had a YouTube channel for over 11 years now, and there's lots of science videos. So if any of the science I've been talking about has piqued your interest, then certainly hop on over to YouTube and watch lots more of my videos.
Awesome. Thank you.